It's a trip, man. It's a trip.
Sounds like a headache.
Works for grown-ups and 9-year-olds. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 225. We'll be talking Leafy meats, wind to heat, and a machine that's neat. This week in the news, we've got the last few days, the last weekend of the green round of the Hackaday Prize. If you've got any environmental hacks, you've got until July 4th to get them in. So if you are hearing fireworks outside, it is already too late. If you haven't heard any fireworks yet, you still have time to get it in. As you hear this, this will be the last weekend, so get on it.
Procrastinators unite.
Exactly. Whenever you get around to it. And that's not much news at all. So let's move on to What's That Sound?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
This week is a sound week, so if you've never played What's That Sound before, it goes a little something like this. We play a sound, you try to guess what it is, we pick a random correct answer next week, and we get you a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt. This week, Kristina's in the hot seat.
Here we go.
Have a listen. Yes?
Well, I know that's not what it is, but it kind of sounds like a speak and spell.
Yeah, it does. Ooh, that's a very good clue. That's an incredibly insightful clue, actually.
So it's a Texas Instruments product?
It is not.
I think they made the
But
speak
yeah,
and spell.
but it uses that same chip.
Oh, nice.
It's from that same era, and it uses the speak and spell chip. Man, kudos. But the rest doesn't ring a bell?
I mean, sort of.
I'll let you guess.
I mean, no.
Fair enough. Okay, well, if you listeners out there have an idea, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Fill in the form, give us your best guess, and we'll see who gets it right next week. All right. Anyway, let's head on over to the hacks. My first hack this week is an Android phone powers a self-driving car, and this is a project by Mankaran Singh, and here he's using Comma AI's Open Pilot, which is a piece of open software meant to run on a couple very specific, very high-powered cell phones that uses the camera and the brains on the cell phone to do lane keeping and distance holding and some simple self-driving car stuff. I guess technically this is an advanced driver assistance system, ADAS. And in this case, it's kind of, level 2 automation. It's not self-driving in any real sense, but it will, keep you from plowing into the car in front of you or hopefully keep you in your lane. And that's kind of what they're aiming at here. Comma AI wanted to be a self-driving car startup and kind of ran into all sorts of regulations. And if you haven't followed that project, it's kind of it was a super ambitious project to begin with. And it was, I guess it ran into the fallacy that enough software would solve any problem in the world. And it doesn't. But the nice thing that came out of Comma AI is this Open Pilot software. And so Mankaran here is building on the Open Pilot software to make his piece, which he's calling Flow Pilot. What the really neat contribution here is to make Open Pilot run on essentially any cell phone instead of just the 2 models that Comma AI's Open Pilot would run on. And the way he does that is really neat. If you've ever used an Android operating system, it's kind of a Linux operating system, but it's also kind of not, and it's not really compatible with anything except Android. And one of the reasons for that is they use, instead of using a regular libc, Android uses this Bionic software library. And Mankaran's workaround here is, instead of rewriting everything to work with Bionic, he then decides to use changeroot, chroot, to jump from the running Android kernel into this kind of Linux operating system there, where he can then compile for basically any cell phone out there on the market. He also wrote an Android app that kind of ties the two pieces together. It's weird, and I don't think I'm 100% sure I understand it, but it looks like he's got the kernel running in kind of Android space. He's got this application that bridges over to the software that's then running in a root over in this kind of fake Linux operating system that he has on the thing. And the Android app in the middle uses sockets to talk between the two. So he doesn't have to write all the device drivers again because they work on the Android side of things, but then he doesn't have to recompile his software to work with an Android system because it runs on kind of the Linuxy change root side of things. And that's not even the point. The point is that this thing is driving a damn car, and that's really cool. I don't know what Mankaran's situation is, but he's got access to a car from a university that's set up to be a self-driving experimental platform. And he's actually just clipped his cell phone up there running this software and is wirelessly controlling the car from inside. And it looks like that part of it's really very simple because he's got access to the right kind of car. He actually shows up in the comments. I think someone does ask him how the Wi-Fi backside of this works, and I don't know if he answered that question, but he does show up in the comments and is answering a few of the other questions. I think from the beginning, one of the questions with Comma AI's software is it completely irresponsible to put the brains of a self-driving car in a crappy cell phone? And I think the answer there is probably. Mankaran is taking this as a research project, not as a finished project, not as a this is going to be a thing for the masses, but as a, hey, you could experiment around with this. And on purpose, kind of controlling the speeds that the maximum speed that the car can respond to any of these inputs from the phone. That way you can override them in real time. It's not going to do anything really dangerous really fast to you anyway. But again, this is meant to be level 2. This is meant to be you are paying attention all the time and ready to override the thing. And, doubly so because it's kind of experimental and running on a cell phone, right? What do you think? Would you put a cell phone in your car and let it drive for you?
I don't think so. I really don't. I'm both surprised and not surprised that you can do this with an Android phone. You know what I mean? Like, first off, I'm like, oh, really? And then like, oh, sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a camera, it's got the graphics processing stuff.
Yeah.
On a good day, the lines on the road are pretty clear and should be pretty easy to pick out with like line detection algorithms.
Oh, you should see some of the lines in my neighborhood. You can't.
Even a human can't tell where the road is.
It's pretty much.
Really?
Yeah, they need to be repainted very badly.
I've driven in a blizzard like that once.
Ooh.
Where I all of a sudden discovered that the guardrail was a lot closer than I thought it was.
Oh, that's not
But
good.
yeah, no, I think you're right too. I think this self-driving cars, or at least this level of self-drivingness, and again, this is level 2. This is only the level of self-drivingness of, say, a Tesla and not a real self-driving car. Oh, sick, full self-driving burn, Elliot. But, this kind of old school, lane holding and distance holding stuff is actually really easy to do with a camera and should be doable with a cell phone. I totally buy it. Someone came in the comments and pointed out the work of automotive automation pioneer Ernst Dickmanns. And so I'm throwing his Wikipedia entry in here. You should absolutely read it because he was doing kind of robot car, self-driving car stuff in the 1980s using, black and white cameras and, 1980s computers. And got cars to do incredibly long runs by the mid-90s, I guess.
Wow.
What is it? In 1995, he had an automated car drive 1,758 kilometers from Munich to Denmark. And that's crazy. Although it wasn't hands off the whole time. In fact, the driver was actually taking over once every 9 kilometers or so. But listen, this is a self-driving car in 1995. This is now like 27 years ago, using like these were the computers that you could just barely play Doom on with any reasonable speed. And cell phone is going to blow that computer out of the water. Plus, we have such better cameras now. Plus, we know a lot more now. And yeah, I kind of agree with you. It's kind of isn't surprising that you could run the brains of a simple self-driving routine on a cell phone.
Especially if you have that platform already.
Yeah, exactly. I also wanted to put this in here because of Dickman's 1986-87 project, which was the most tortured acronym ever. It's Program for a European Traffic of Highest Efficiency and Unprecedented Safety, Prometheus. And to get the prom in there, you have to go with program, and you have to capitalize the M in the middle of program. European Traffic of Highest Efficiency and Unprecedented Safety. That's awesome. So, best acronym ever, pioneering work in self-driving cars. Anyway, super cool port of OpenPilot to essentially like every cell phone out there. The way it's done, I think, could be a really neat template for other people who want to run Linux-like stuff on Android phones. Yeah, super piece of work. Well worth your time to go check it out in depth.
For my first hack, I chose 3D printed machine shows how braiding is done. Boy, howdy does it ever. This is just a beautiful, fascinating dance to watch. It's enchanting, like a maypole dance. Have you ever seen a maypole dance?
I haven't seen a real maypole dance in like life.
Okay.
But I've seen a braiding machine.
Oh, it's so complicated, but it also kind of isn't. It's kind of like the cell phone driving a car. Because if you watch and put it together in the video, and if you just watch it long enough, it's a 12 spool machine, and there's 2 spools to a gear, so there's 6 gears, and they pass through and around each other, and like Dan says, it's hard to describe, but they kind of look like synchronized swimmers from the top. There's a lot of top down going on in the video. Just watch the video already. Because it's just beautiful to watch, and it's neat to watch them put it together too.
Yeah, it's like some kind of super high-speed square dance or something where they do-si-do and they switch their partners and stuff. It's doing that all the time. If you're watching the video and trying to figure out how the motion goes, my only tip is watch the lime green spindle, because all the others are too close in color to each other and you're just going to get lost. But the lime green spindle is the way to go. No, what I love about this machine is those gears. Like you said, there's 6 gears that all turn together, and they've kind of got forks on them that meet together so that the 2 open parts of the forks join each other, and that's where the spindle goes from from orbiting one gear to orbiting the next. And this kind of, interweaving, all slipping around each other spindle trick is what makes it work. And phew. But watching him assemble the machine also should help a little bit, but you're going to have to do that at least 2 times before you understand it too. That's no slight on France here, because we've seen a bunch of his videos of these crazy machines, and he makes beautiful demo machines of very complicated mechanisms. You've reviewed a bunch of his videos before on the podcast.
I have. I don't mean to single him out.
No, it's quite all right. He makes awesome stuff. I think he's done like a sewing machine build. And this is one of those where also the tension on the different ropes or cords or whatever seems to be super important. And he's just built so many machines that do that.
I wish there was more footage of it just running.
Yeah, right? Well, I mean, it loops, so you could make an animated GIF out of it.
Oh, that's true.
You'd be set. All right, then my next hack, Honda head unit reverse engineering and the dismal state of infotainment systems. This is kind of the beginning of a project by Eric McDonald to reverse engineer the infotainment system on his 2021 Honda Civic. And I think it goes for all the kind of, he calls them 10th generation Honda head units. And what's funny here is that he starts hacking on this thing, and it's basically a glorified Android tablet, he calls it. And worse, it's an Android tablet that runs an Android version from way back in 2012. And that means it's got all sorts of unpatched security holes in it. And that is how he gets in. And so you can fairly easily just root the infotainment system here because it's using a 10-year-old Android OS. I don't know if it's a little bit cheating or if it's just the quick and dirty way, but Eric actually buys a software called Honda Hack to root the head unit for him. And so what Honda Hack does is it has a web server and you connect to it and then it roots your, in this case, car for you, which is interesting enough. One of the projects, though, here is to figure out a free and open source way of rooting these things. And Eric's intuition here is that there has to be one of the known old hacks to get you in. And so he's kind of calling out in his GitHub repo here for help with figuring out an open sourcier way to get into these things. But the real meat of the hack is him documenting everything he's done so far to get full control of this thing. And that includes all of the connectors and how to step through the recovery and putting a boot image on there and all of that kind of basic Android hackery stuff over in the docs directory of his GitHub folder. So if you haven't hacked on old Android phones from, ages ago, and you want to know where the special wires are and what you need to hook up to this Honda thing, he's got that all for you here. And the idea is to just make it a community repository. So he's calling for everybody to help him do some work on this thing, try to take it apart, try to figure out what makes it work and run apps that you want to run on it. Because, as he says, it's pretty much a shame to have a part of your car running 10-year-old cell phone software, and especially a part of your car that connects to the internet, and especially a part of your car that's also connected to some of its internal functions. We've seen a ton of hacks recently, and Maya linked some of them out in this article to people, opening up the headlight and getting into the CAN bus that way, and then worming their way in to open up the doors, fire up the ignition, and steal the car, all through the CAN bus that talks to the front headlight, that makes sure the front headlight's working. With the infotainment system, of course, it's a step easier because they all connect to Wi-Fi, and that means principle anyone on the internet can hack into your car. So yeah, big open attack surface and running outdated software. That's a little bit of a shame. So I think it's both a fun hack to try to play with these things. It won't leave you without a car, probably. It might leave you without a radio in your car, but it's not going to break your car. So it's a kind of a fun hack on that side, but it's also kind of an important hack because these kind of backdoors in coming in through the infotainment system is a popular way to do bad stuff to cars these days. And so I think it's good to kind of shine some light in these funny, moldy little corners and see if we can clean them up a little bit.
I'm glad I have an old car.
Yeah, right?
I might not be so lucky next time, but I don't have an infotainment system right now. For my next hack, I chose Gumball Coasters 3D printed candy fun. This comes from Adrian Seeley. So what's more fun than those big gumball machines that spiral your ball around before dispensing it? Making your own, of course. Now, in this case, this is more of a gumball run than just a spiral action. So it's even more fun, just off the bat. But what's really cool is that it's programmatically produced. You just decide and instruct the number of straights and turns and ramps. And this creates a JSON file, which is processed via JavaScript. And then you have a tiled representation of the track via OpenSCAD. So as large as this is, Adrian's gonna make an even larger one for a candy store display. And that's gonna be wicked, because it'll probably be very wide too.
It's a marble run basically, right? And what I really like about it is his idea to make a square grid on which all the pieces kind of fit. The underlying square grid structure with a bunch of vertical supports to hold it all together and stuff makes it really easy. And of course, the fact that it comes spat out of a computer makes it even easier still, I guess, right? I just really like the design and construction method. It simplifies it down to units, and then you can just combine the units on top of each other and, with a rubber mallet, hammer them all together, and boom, you're off to the races.
That would be really nice for making pinball ramps, I would think.
Oh, yeah, right?
That'd be cool, yeah.
You could make super elaborate pinball ramps.
Because why not?
It might get a little frustrating. I'm watching the gumballs go down this one, and how many seconds do they take to go from the top to the bottom? It's like if you were doing this with a pinball game, you'd shoot the ball up there and you'd be like, I gotta go get a drink. I'll be right back. And then like 10 minutes later, the ball comes flying down, right?
It would be helpful for multi-ball.
Yeah, see?
Now I want some gumballs. But I can't make chompy sounds while we make the podcast.
You cannot. No. No gumballs till we're done. All right, there is no possible segue to go from crazy gumball runs to Leafy meats. But here we go. This is a video from Thought Emporium. Get your Leafy meats. And this is a crazy project. I guess we've seen something like this from him before. This is decellularization and recellularization. He wanted to do it with spinach, but it ended up being too big for his little culture cells, so he ended up doing also cilantro and mint just because they fit. But taking green leaves and decellularizing them, so you take out all of the cells out of there, and then all you're left with is this kind of, whatever it is in plants, fibrous infrastructure. And then he's recellularizing it by taking rat muscle cells and injecting them onto this thing and letting them grow up around the scaffolding that's left of the decellularized leaves. And why would you do this? Well, it's nowhere near as pointless as you think. If people want to eventually regrow organs or body parts for human transplant, this is actually a tremendously promising route to take. Kind of making a scaffolding and then taking some of that person's cells, growing them up on it. One of the examples that's shown in this video is an ear transplant, and people are kind of literally culturing up ears. And if it's your own cells, of course, then your body doesn't reject it. And that's really the point here. Thought Emporium is just playing around with that here and just making meat leaves. Like you do. It turns out the secret to decellularizing them, because cells are basically just, little balls of fatty protein, you can break them down with whatever you'd normally break down fats with, and that is basically soap. And he uses a combination of some increasingly stronger soaps and actually a bleach at the end, but to kind of wipe out all of the cells out of these leaves. First step is actually to take the waxy outer leaf part off, and what dissolves wax nicely? Acetone. So first is dip in acetone and then let it soak, and I guess very carefully, very gently let it soak in increasingly concentrated soapy formulas for a few days. So after multiple cycles of this kind of decellularization, you're left with just this raw, fibery scaffolding. Culturing cells is no problem. What I learned from this, though, is that he uses a fluorescent stain called calcine to test whether he's actually getting living cells growing on this matrix or not. I guess it's a fluorescent protein that in the presence of calcium fluoresces. So when the cells take this stuff in, they then start to glow fluorescent green. And so you can tell which cells are healthy. And so if the whole thing is like glowing fluorescent green under black light, he knows he's got a bunch of healthy cells growing on his leaf matrix. And yeah, in the end, he gets creepy leaves made out of cow and rat muscle, which is super bizarre, but you know. Anyway, future projects here include, instead of growing muscles, maybe growing bone on the remaining fibrous scaffolding here. So you could get leaves made of bone. How cool would that be?
Would they be stronger?
Than leaves? I presume so.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's... Well, I don't know what the point is. The point is just to see if you can, is the point, I think. But yeah, I believe so.
Okay. This is insane.
It's definitely insane. I think recently the FDA has allowed a couple different cultured chicken meats to go on sale in the States. And I wanted to throw some links from that into the show notes, but I couldn't find any by the time we're recording this. But y'all are going to have cultured chicken meat pretty soon.
It's gonna know Shakespeare and stuff.
Boo.
Well, who could balk at that? Balk. For my next hack, I chose retro-inspired computer case hosts mechanical keyboard. This comes to us from JIT, and this device harkens way back to the 80s when you, more often than not, had to hook the thing up to a TV. You basically had a chunky keyboard with all the guts in there, and, well, you hooked it up to a TV and Bob's your uncle. Now, JIT didn't like the design of the Pi 400. He found it uninspired, so they made their own. And inside is an Odroid XU4, which actually has a little more power than the Pi and is purportedly easier to find these days. But the coolest thing, probably, besides the LEDs, form factor, and the vents, because you gotta have vents, is the floppy sound drive emulation.
Oh my god, I hear it. It's making floppy drive seek sounds. Oh, that's absurd.
And I have a floppy drive on my desk.
My first quick hack this week is Building a Tesla Coil with Just 3 Components by William Fraser. This is the coolest little Tesla coil design. It is an ultra minimal Slayer exciter Tesla coil.
Aww.
It's got a transistor. It taps the coil itself to fire the transistor periodically. And it's got a super cap on it to provide the power. What's really cool is that he bends the legs of the transistor around to make the primary coil and has no way of turning this thing on except he comes at it with a piezo lighter, and that sparks and generates just enough current through the coil to make the thing turn itself on, and it runs until the super cap's out. Really cool 3-component Tesla coil. You could build it yourself in 15 minutes.
It's so cute.
So cute. Next up, luxury train cars used to ride on paper wheels. This is a documentary by Train of Thought. It is exactly just what it says. They would take a whole bunch of sheets of paper, laminate them together with glue, and then cover it with steel on the outside and on the hubs. The idea was to make it more damping so that it would make luxury sleeper cars sound a lot quieter on the rails. As you might expect, these didn't last very long, and nobody does this anymore. But they did it for a little while, and it was the height of luxury. And last up, formation flying does more than look good. This is an interesting video and a whole bunch of simulations and basically deep dive into why birds fly in V's and why you might want to do the same thing with fixed wing / airplane-like drones. And the answer is because they make wingtip vortices. They push the air down at the edge of their wings, and that makes a little bit of an updraft for a plane that's flying just behind them at kind of almost overlapping wing distance. And if you ever look at birds, they know that this trick works. And the thought experiment here is to design routing algorithms and the control stuff so that you could do this with a bunch of like model airplane style drones to get them a lot more range.
First up is electronics earrings are PCB art you can wear. This comes to us from DIY guy Chris. Boy, electronic earrings have gotten really small over the years. And these are no exception, and they just look better and better all the time. Now here we've got 8 2812s in very small 2020 form factor, and they're driven by an AT Tiny 13-A microcontroller. And I mean, they just look really good. And dig that tiny hot plate in the video. That is so cool. I want a tiny hot plate. I guess I could make one.
I think so.
I could make one. Next up comes from our own Jenny List. IKEA hack Kvart into mic stand. Now a Kvart is a classic gooseneck lamp. Jenny has a bunch of these lying around and can get more for £4 or so. And that's pounds sterling. So she designed a printed part to attach to the business end of the lamp, which already has like a clamp on the other end. So she printed an action camera mount, like a GoPro mount with the 3 things. Are we allowed to say GoPro?
I think so.
And another printed part to actually hold the £4 as in sterling Logitech microphone that she got for next to nothing. But it's actually like a Rock Band type microphone, USB microphone. It's just for over the bench, so it's not for, I don't think she'll be making any podcasts on it or anything. And lastly, Watch hides gesture controls in wristband. This comes to us from Josh. It's a simpler smartwatch without the Big Brother aspect. All the gesture controls are built into the wristband, which is very cool, especially if you have a prosthesis. The video shows Josh using it with both an elbow and a wrist as a gesture instead of a finger or something finer. The wristband uses resistive sensors for pressure sensing and capacitive sensors for precision and gesture recognition. And right now it's in the prototyping stage, but it looks pretty good.
All right, it's time for our can't miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I wanted to feature Lewin Day's Wind to Heat, a lot of hot air. This is a cool idea to make a direct-to-heat windmill, basically. And this was inspired by some news here in Germany, actually, that they were taking excess wind power, electricity generating wind power, and on really windy days when there's kind of excess generation capacity, instead of just burning it, they're going to take the excess electricity and turn it into heat and heat up a bunch of water that then they'll pump around to people's houses and radiators and keep them warm in the winter. But then the question is, why the electricity in the middle? If you wanted to make a heater using wind power directly, could you? And it turns out this is an old idea, and Lewin did a bunch of research and found a bunch of kind of 1970s, 1980s, I guess not surprisingly, in Denmark, people were working on this during the height of the oil crisis. Why Denmark? Well, they got a ton of wind and cold winters, so it actually makes a lot of sense. And basically, it's using kind of blades inside a pool of water to heat it up. And so it's just literally hitting the water until it warms up and then circulating it through a radiator. Top's powered by a windmill, bottom is fins in water. It's like as simple as you can get. And because it's so simple, it should be more efficient than the let's make a generator and turn it into electricity, and then let's run this electricity through something resistive. And so for this particular application, like making heat on a farm, it actually does promise to be pretty good. And a lot of these Danish and Dutch experiments worked reportedly very well, and the people who were working on them went on to get good jobs with giant wind power companies. So go figure, right? The other thing that came out of this, though, is that some people were thinking of using wind power directly to replace the pump in a heat pump. And that's even crazier still. And I think this is now kind of, extremely difficult engineering and cutting edge crazy. But if you think about it, a heat pump just compresses a fluid on one side and expands it on the other. So really all you need to do to make a heat pump work, it's like a refrigerator, you just need something to turn that motor. And that's all the power going into it. Why not run that motor with a wind turbine instead? And that's the point here. And I think that's super crazy clever. And, all of these are probably really niche applications. Like, you have to have good wind, and it has to be not entirely critical, or at least you can smooth the peaks and valleys out because it's not windy every day. And, in a lot of places, it's not windy at night, right? And that's where it's coldest. So you want your heater to run at night when there's no wind. So all of these systems have ways of storing the heat as well. So like, warm up a big swimming pool full of water so that you've got a lot more thermal mass going on, for instance. Anyway, just really crazy out of the box thinking, and probably good for farms in places with wind, and particularly, kind of a particularly low tech solution in a way to harvesting free energy from the wind. I kind of like it.
Well, I chose Dan Maloney's podcast feedback. Be careful what you ask for.
Oh no.
I thought this was funny. Dan got a gift from the heavens in the form of wheat thins and some gross-looking sandwich spread, mayonnaise type stuff. Understandably, he was perplexed and flummoxed and etc. because he did not order these things. And anyway, the explanation here is that a few weeks ago, Dan and Elliot were discussing Jenny's article on home assistants and how they somehow have yet to take over the world. And Dan talked about how mass ordering of groceries and things, or really anything via voice, really wasn't for him. And he joked that just by talking about it, a podcast listener's Alexa may have ordered him some, for instance, wheat thins and mayonnaise. Well, an enterprising listener did just exactly that as a joke. And what's not a joke is that he found Dan through the ham license database. Now, why? I mean, I guess you have to have your address.
You do. It's public
in the ham license.
Yeah.
Database.
Because people have to be able to contact you.
Yeah.
So that's how it went. So Dan does a ham radio column. He must have published his call sign. Boom. Look him up on the FCC database, and you're done. And then you could just mail him some wheat thins and mayonnaise.
I thought it was particularly funny that it was Dan. Because like he says, there was a time when I probably would have soaked an unsolicited package like that in a barrel of water for a few hours before opening it. But I've mellowed a bit over the years. But then he makes a salient point. Honestly, the thought of what would have happened if my mom got a package like this was more unnerving.
Right?
I'm trying to imagine my mom getting a package, because I order things from Amazon for her. Like, she's one of my addresses.
So she just thinks it's from you anyway. You're all good.
Yeah, probably.
She'd probably just call you up and ask you why the mayonnaise.
Do I need to refrigerate this, or only after you open it, Mom? I just thought it was very interesting and funny, and I had to bring it back to the podcast. So here you are.
Exactly.
Full circle.
Thanks, John Kangas, for doing this. It was pretty damn funny. Yeah, someone in the comments suggested that Dan should have asked for something a little better than wheat thins and mayonnaise.
A laptop that hasn't come out yet.
Exactly.
I've been looking at those newfangled Polaroid instant cameras. Actually, not the Polaroid, but those are available on Amazon. I'm not in the FCC database, but...
See, there you go. You get your ham radio license and you'll be receiving free. Yeah.
Receiving, that's funny.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
I do need my ham license.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Well, that's it for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you want to follow along with the links or add your comments, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, send us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
All right. Quick drink, and then let's fire it up. All right, here goes. Mm-hmm.
Boom. France? Excuse me?
The long, stringy things. What am I looking for? Can't find word. I will just... To get them a lot more... Mm-hmm.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Ta-da!
There you have it.
And there you go, ladies and gentlemen.
I was worried you weren't going to do that part, but then you did. I can